What if you could use the law of attraction to manifest the things in your life even though they seem impossible? Well, that's exactly what my dad did when he didn't have money to manifest a house. I was just a little kid at the time. We were living in an apartment. It wasn't a terrible place, but it wasn't all that great either. And he wanted to live in his own house. They had never had a home up until that time. So one day my dad comes home with the hedge clippers, a little machine to trim the bushes and in front of the house. But my dad lived in an apartment and they didn't have any bushes and they didn't have to maintain the property either. And so he comes home with this hedge trimmer and he brings it to the house. And my mom is like, "What is that for?" He's like, "That's for our house that we're gonna buy." And my mom's like, "We don't have money for a house. We don't have money for a down payment. How are we ever going to afford a house in this lifetime?" Like, I don't know, but I know we're going to get a house and we're going to get it soon. So I bought a hedge trimmer because we're going to need the hedge trimmer for the house. And my mom thought he was nuts. And she just probably was mad at him because he's spending money on a hedge trimmer that they really could have used for other things like me and my brothers. But yet my dad believed it 100%. He was 100% convinced that somehow, some way, they were going to get a house. And so it wasn't but a few months later, he's walking down the street, he's just out for a walk, and he sees an older man. And the older man's working in his yard and he's having difficulty doing whatever he's doing. And being the kind of guy my dad was, he went over to help the guy. He's like, "Listen, I'll do that for you. Can I help you?" And the guy at first, was like, "No, that's okay. I can handle it. I'll figure it out. I'll do it myself." My dad's like, "I'm not doing anything today. I have some time. Why don't I just help you out?" And so he helped him do whatever he was doing. I don't remember if it was moving a planting or something or whatever it was. He was doing something that was physically very, very difficult for the older gentleman. And so as they're doing the work together, my dad and the gentleman build a rapport, Mr. Katz. They build a rapport. And so they're talking and they're getting to know each other and they're having a good time. And so Mr. Katz asked my dad, he's like, "What are you doing in this area?" He's like, "Well, I'm just trying to figure out how I can buy a house. I'm trying to buy a house and I don't know how I'm going to do it. I'm working like crazy. I'm saving a little bit of money that I can. We got money that's growing, but it's growing so slowly. We're not so sure how we're ever going to be able to afford a house." And Mr. Cass says, "You know what? We've been thinking about selling our house. And, we want to make sure because we built this house, we want to make sure it goes to a good family. And that's really, really important with us. It's more important than the price. And so we want to make sure it goes to a family that's going to also raise their kids here and build the kind of memories that we built with our family here. But now we're retiring and we're moving to Florida." And says, "How much money do you have?" And my dad said whatever the amount of money was. And it wasn't a whole lot. It was much less than it should have been for a down payment on a house. He's like, "Well, let me talk to Mr. Katz said, "Let me talk to my wife and come back tomorrow and we'll discuss it again and we'll see what we can do." And so my dad leaves. He goes home, he tells my mom. She's like, yeah, whatever. And then he goes back to talk to Mr. Katz again. He's like, "My wife and I talked about it." I was like, "Here's what we can do. We'll take the money you have for a down payment, even though it's not really enough, and we'll split up the rest of the down payment over time. And I'll hold the mortgage for you for whatever it was, 20 years or whatever it was back then." So my dad had to make the mortgage payments and he had to make an extra payment in the beginning for whatever number of time, it was a year or 2 years, make an extra payment to make up for the down payment. And then it was just a regular mortgage after that. And so my dad would work Saturdays, sometimes Sundays if he had the time. And so he was working like crazy to be able to pay the mortgage and the extra down payment money up front. And he made that work. And then that's how he bought the house, even though he didn't have the money to buy it. It seemed impossible. My mom didn't believe it. He had so much faith that he bought this hedge trimmer for the house that he would have to buy. And the guy who he bumped into by serendipitous action, if you will, was willing to not only hold the mortgage, which was a little difficult back then, but also finance the down payment over a period of whatever it was, 2 years or something. And so how does things like that happen? Is because my dad at that moment for that goal was 100% convinced that he would get a house some way, somehow, even though he didn't know how it was going to happen. He had faith, so much faith, that he bought the hedge trimmer. And I remember not too much longer later, because that house didn't really have the shrubs and the hedges that my dad wanted, he bought the shrubs for it. And I remember planting the shrubs with him, and those shrubs stayed there for decades after he built them. Decades. That goes evergreen shrubs that he put in front of the house, so there'd be a little barrier between the road and the house. And I remember I was just a little guy, like helping him, if you will, helping him. And I even have a picture of that. I don't think I know where it is, but I know I still have a picture of that somewhere. Me being a whole tiny little guy, and my dad a relatively big, strong, fit guy because he was a carpenter, which I eventually became a carpenter like him. The idea is that you need to have this unwavering faith that somehow, some way, somewhere, you'll achieve or manifest the thing that you want to manifest into your life. And some of that will be serendipitous, some of that's through action, some of that's through pure faith, and sometimes it's the universe conspiring to help you to make things happen. But it requires all of those things. My dad had focus. He had clarity on what he wanted. He wanted to get a house. He didn't know how, but he knew he would get it. He had faith. He had bought the hedge trimmers, knowing that it would happen at some point somewhere. And so he bought the hedge trimmers for the bushes that would be in front of the house that he would one day eventually own, which ended up being a very short time later. And he also took action. He went and he did something good for Mr. Katz. Not that that's necessarily required, but that was the thing that put him into the position. He manifested his own destiny by chance, going to help that older gentleman, Mr. Katz, in doing whatever the yard work that he needed help with that day. And so he created that. Plus, he had been saving the money. Wasn't a lot, but he had been saving something. Plus, he talked to Mr. Katz and made a deal with him. So he took that into his own hands. So these are the action parts. And then he worked extra hours, more hours than he was working already, for those 2 years to be able to pay the down payment off over time. So belief and faith, clarity, being vibrationally aligned, having faith up to what the thing that you want, and taking action of the thing you want. Those are all the things my dad did. Just like when I ran across America, I knew I would cross that finish line. I saw it in my mind thousands of times before I even got to the start line, when I ran a marathon a day for 100 consecutive days across America. So I ran almost 3,000 miles. I knew that would happen. My friend who became a millionaire, he wrote it down 50 times in his notebook, in his journal. I will become a millionaire through my law practice. And he wrote it down 50 times every morning until that became a reality, which ended up just being whatever it was, a handful of months later. He achieved it much quicker than he had been trying to achieve it for years before that. But because he had aligned himself with 100% faith, he attracted that. People that I know, in fact, I know quite a few people who had been very severely overweight and decided, this is enough is enough, and I'm going to be a healthy, fit person. And they became that healthy, fit person within 6 months or a year or 2 years, whatever it took to get to that healthy point, because they had this one vision in their mind to achieve that one thing. And they were aligned by believing it, taking action, and being focused on that one thing. So what is that one thing that you want in your life? What is the thing that would be the game changer for you? Do you have that kind of clarity to what that is? Do you have the focus to make it happen? Are you vibrationally aligned? Do you have the faith that it's going to happen one way or another? I'm going to achieve it. And then are you taking the actions to make it happen? Because like my dad just happened to be walking down the street. He didn't know how it was going to happen, but he knew it was happening, and he was saving the money, and he was getting ready for this thing to happen. He bought the hedge trimmers. Just like I would go out and I would train, and I would, even though I wasn't a runner, a year before my run across America, I was running and I was training to be able to do this thing and doing all of the logistics that needed to happen for me to run across America. I was working towards it. I had 100% faith it was going to happen. My friend who earned $1 million, he was working in his business, but he was also reducing the resistance, the emotional, mental resistance, and aligning vibrationally to earning $1 million in a year net income. And it was aligning to that.